Ladies and gentlemen of the courtroom, the air is thick with anticipation as the divorce hearing convenes in this modest county courthouse. At the center of this whirlwind is the marriage of Elizabeth and Jonathan Whitaker, once high school sweethearts whose decade-long union now unravels under the harsh glare of legal scrutiny. The judge, known for his no-nonsense approach, calls the session to order, and attorneys rise promptly. On one side, Elizabeth's counsel, keen-eyed and determined, rises to deliver opening remarks. On the other, Jonathan's defense attorney, a seasoned advocate with a reputation for dramatic courtroom gestures, prepares to counter. Elizabeth sits at the plaintiff's table, composed yet visibly tense. Her gaze briefly meets Jonathan's across the room. He appears calm, almost too calm, dressed immaculately in a tailored suit and polished shoes. Observers note the contrast. She, in a muted skirt suit, every muscle taut, he, relaxed, hands folded on the table, seeming to await whatever comes. Whispers circulate among the few attendees, speculating on the grounds for this contentious divorce. The couple's only child, a teenager named Samantha, remains at home under the care of grandparents, unaware of the storm about to break in court. As opening statements conclude, the judge outlines the agenda: division of assets, spousal support, and any contested issues, standard fare for a dissolution of marriage. Yet beneath the procedural veneer lurks an undercurrent of tension that hints at secrets waiting to surface. Elizabeth's attorney gestures subtly to a pair of shoes beneath Jonathan's chair, and the courtroom's attention shifts. Before anyone can understand why, a hush falls. Jonathan's twin brother, Michael Whitaker, long presumed dead, stands just inside the doorway, framed in the doorway's dim light. His presence sends a ripple through the courtroom. The judge pauses mid-sentence, eyes widening, as murmurs swell into a cacophony of disbelief. If this hearing was meant to be routine, it no longer is. The pulse of every person in the room quickens, wondering, was Michael dead, or merely missing? And what secrets bind these brothers together? Chapter 2, Wife's Unsettling Testimony ****. Elizabeth rises carefully, shoulders squared. The courtroom quiets as she takes the oath. Her voice, steady at first, betrays a tremor when she begins to speak. She recounts her life with Jonathan, college sweethearts, a modest home, a growing family, and shared dreams of a quieter existence in their small hometown. For years, she believed in the solidity of their bond. Then came the shocking news: Jonathan's untimely death 5 years earlier in a supposed car accident on a lonely mountain highway. She describes the day she received the call, the disbelief, the grief-stricken funeral, and the months of widowhood that followed. She speaks of the letters and purported legal documents that arrived after his funeral, each implicating name after name to verify his identity. A death certificate, funeral photos, even a local news report, a tragedy that shook their community. Yet Elizabeth never questioned any of it. As a grieving wife, she accepted every detail at face value. Friends and neighbors comforted her, attended memorial services, and contributed to a scholarship fund established in Jonathan's name. She wept at his gravesite, visited monthly. Everyone around her moved on, and after a respectful interval, life resumed its normal rhythm, until her chance encounter with an older neighbor who casually mentioned seeing Jonathan alive at a diner miles away from the accident site. The courtroom remains hushed as Elizabeth describes her shock upon learning that rumors circulated about Jonathan's survival. She searched social media profiles, scanned local news archives, and even hired a private investigator. She reveals the exact date she confronted him in person, a rainy afternoon by the edge of town, where fog lingered and roads wound like ribbons. He denied everything, insisting the neighbor's sighting was mistaken, but she noticed an unmistakable tremor in his voice when he spoke. At that moment, doubt crept into her mind, but the evidence she needed only materialized months later, when she discovered a hidden camera in one of his shoes. Chapter 3, Hidden Camera, The Poison Shoe. Elizabeth's attorney asks her to remove Jonathan's shoes from under the table. The judge nods for Jonathan's cooperation. With surprise flashing across his face, Jonathan lifts one polished black shoe from beneath the table. Elizabeth stands, walks to the bench, and gently but firmly pries off the shoe. A hush blankets the room. She turns it over and produces a small device, no larger than a matchbox, taped inside the sole. Jurors lean forward, breath caught. The device is retrieved and passed to the bailiff, who carefully hands it to a technician awaiting in the back. The technician glances at the device, nods, and places it under a magnifying lamp. A hush reigns until, a moment later, he indicates it is safe to play the footage. Without emotion, Elizabeth relates the day she retrieved that shoe from the closet. She describes the hum of the hidden camera's red recording light and the shock of retrieving a memory card that contained hours of footage that would shatter the courtroom's concept of reality. She recalls her trembling hands as she inserted the memory card into her laptop, watched pixelated grain turn into a living nightmare. In the clip, her husband's face appears, lit by the warm glow of kitchen lights. He speaks to an unknown friend on speakerphone, admitting he faked his own death, describing the meticulous planning of a staged accident, forging documents, and even arranging a false funeral procession. Every word etched betrayal deeper into her heart. The defense attorney jumps to his feet, protesting this is a violation of privacy and lacks context. He demands the footage be reviewed before presentation, but the judge, eyes cold with authority, rules that any objections be reserved until after the evidence is admitted. In a swift gesture, the technician presses play on a courtroom monitor. The projected image is distant but clear enough that the audience can see Jonathan's face as he speaks words intended never to be heard outside that room. Letters of disbelief pass among spectators, journalists taking notes, neighbors whispering, and jurors exchanging incredulous glances. The revelation moves faster than a storm cloud rolling over mountainsides. Chapter 4, Flashback to the faked death. As the silent courtroom watches the monitor, Elizabeth's voice takes on the tone of a reporter narrating a documentary. 5 years ago, on a cold December night, Jonathan Whitaker, then 35, drove his car off a cliff in what was later reported as an accident. The footage shifts to grainy security camera clips from a convenience store near the accident site. Jonathan enters the store wearing a heavy coat and sunglasses. A clerk greets him with no recognition. He uses a credit card that later traces back to a shell company registered under his name. He buys supplies, a hoodie, gloves, and a disposable camera. Then he exits, the image distorting in the darkness as he heads toward his car. The scene cuts to security audio from a gas station down the road, capturing his voice on a payphone. "It's done. Tonight, I vanish." That recorded conversation, long buried under police files, revealed nothing at the time. Authorities dismissed it as a prank call. In another clip, Jonathan meets with a man in a parking lot, possibly an accomplice, handing off a forged document. The next morning, local law enforcement found his car submerged at the base of a steep embankment, license plate torn off, windshield cracked in spiderweb patterns. The state coroner's office, relying on dental records and personal effects, declared him deceased on impact. A funeral was organized, mourners gathered, eulogies delivered. Elizabeth wept at his graveside, believing every word. Now, in this courtroom, the footage ends at that moment of impact, but for the audience, the story continues. Elizabeth's narration picks up. While the world thought him dead, he was alive and hiding out under a new identity in a different state. He changed his appearance, altered his mannerisms, and severed contact with everyone who knew him. It was an elaborate masquerade. She pauses, letting that sink in. The jury members glance at one another. They recall the local news coverage, the sympathy tributes, even the scholarship fund created in Jonathan's memory. All those memories, all those acts of kindness, built on a deception that now lies exposed. Chapter 5, Jurors stunned, evidence revealed. The judge leans forward, scanning the jury panel. 12 ordinary citizens, ranging in age from their 20s to their 60s, trained to absorb facts dispassionately but clearly taken aback by the gravity of the evidence. A woman in her 50s brushes away a tear, a young man scribbles in his notepad, eyes wide. The presiding judge reminds them of their duty: weigh the evidence impartially, determine its validity, and render a verdict based on legal standards. Yet none can escape the sensation that this case transcends mere divorce proceedings. Elizabeth's attorney steps up to introduce additional context. He describes Jonathan's twin brother, Michael, declared dead at the same time under troublingly similar circumstances. Michael, he explains, was reported to have perished in a separate accident in a nearby town just weeks before Jonathan's accident. No DNA testing was done. Authorities presumed identity based on familial resemblance and shared photographs. Elizabeth's lawyer holds up a photograph, a side-by-side of the twins at their high school graduation. The jury leans closer. Both brothers, so identical that friends and family admitted they often couldn't tell them apart. Yet Michael's alleged death, the family contends, was unrelated. The twins drifted apart after college, living in different states. But the revelation of Jonathan's forgery, the faked death, casts a long shadow over Michael's demise. The defense attorney rises, objecting that this line of inquiry smacks of speculation. He insists no evidence links Jonathan's ruse to Michael's passing. The judge allows the line of questioning to proceed cautiously, and Elizabeth's lawyer introduces a series of documents: police reports, incomplete missing person files, and a collection of letters Michael purportedly sent to the family in the months leading to his absence. There is no proof those letters came from Michael, only a postmark. The judge nods, reminding jurors that authenticity must be determined through cross-examination and expert testimony. The jury retreats into quiet contemplation, the courtroom atmosphere now heavy with uncertainty and unspoken questions. Chapter 6: Enter the dead twin. Before the trial recesses for lunch, the courtroom doors open again and two uniformed bailiffs appear. Behind them strides a figure that causes gasps throughout the room: Michael Whitaker, Jonathan's twin, alive and well, dressed in a simple button-down shirt and jeans. His presence is electric, and a hush falls as the judge demands an explanation. Elizabeth stands, hands clenched, face a mask of fury and confusion. Jonathan's jaw tightens, his eyes darting toward Michael, whose gaze is steady and unflinching. Michael approaches the witness stand. The gallery rises in unison, a collective breath held. The judge asks him to state his name for the record. Michael James Whitaker, he replies calmly. He offers no further comment until the judge motions him to sit. The attorneys exchange hurried whispers, the jury members steal glances. Observers scribble furiously in notebooks, recording every detail. Reporters whisper to camera crews waiting outside, eager to capture this bombshell moment. The bailiffs escort Michael to the witness chair. The judge reminds him he is under oath. Elizabeth's attorney rises immediately to examine him. Mr. Whitaker, he begins, you were believed to have died 5 years ago in a car accident, correct? Michael nods. You and your brother were said to be close, yet we received a death certificate indicating you passed away in a separate incident. Can you explain how you are here today? Michael's gaze shifts momentarily to Jonathan, then back to the jury. I never died, he states simply. I left home to escape a life I couldn't bear. After a series of personal crises, I went into hiding. When I heard Jonathan was staging something similar, I believed my own secret was safe. I never imagined it would unravel like this. Murmurs ripple through the courtroom. Jonathan leans forward, eyes narrowing. The judge cautions everyone to maintain decorum. Michael continues, I returned because lives were ruined, families torn apart. I owe a truth to my parents, to my sister, and to Elizabeth. I never meant to cause harm, but I realize now that by running, I left too many broken pieces behind. Elizabeth sinks back into her chair, tears welling. The defense attorney rises to object, arguing Michael's testimony is irrelevant to the divorce case. The judge overrules, citing relevance: Michael's presence may shed light on Jonathan's motivations. The jury is instructed to listen and determine how this revelation fits within the broader context of deceit, betrayal, and the dissolution of this marriage. Chapter 7: Judge demands the truth. The judge's gavel taps firmly on the bench. "We will proceed with Michael Whitaker's testimony," he announces. His tone is steely, signaling that this case will no longer follow a predictable path. The courtroom settles. Michael takes a deep breath, visibly aware of the eyes fixed upon him. "Your Honor, members of the jury, I understand that my presence raises more questions than answers. 5 years ago, I was 28 years old. I was struggling, mentally, emotionally, and financially. I told no one I was leaving. I destroyed my ID, my credit cards, every tie I had to my past. I lived under an assumed name in Arizona." Elizabeth's attorney questions him relentlessly. How did he manage to maintain anonymity? How did no one notice him? Michael responds methodically. He worked odd jobs under a fake identity, kept to himself, and avoided contact with anyone who might recognize him. "I believed if I vanished, things would settle for everyone," he admits. "I never imagined Jonathan would replicate my actions for his own gain." The courtroom shifts uncomfortably as Elizabeth's attorney presses Michael about his relationship with Jonathan before the disappearances. Michael describes a rift. Jonathan, ever the ambitious twin, was obsessed with escaping their hometown and building a new life. Michael, introverted and broken-hearted over a failed relationship, sought anonymity. They rarely spoke after Michael left. Jurors scribble notes as Michael explains how, 2 years ago, he learned Jonathan was living under a false identity in a neighboring state. "I saw him at a grocery store. He tried to ignore me, but his eyes gave him away. I left immediately, not wanting to force his cover to unravel." The defense attorney seizes on this. "So your presence in this courtroom stems from a chance encounter?" Michael nods, partially. "But after Elizabeth discovered the hidden camera, revealing Jonathan's admission that he faked his death, I realized I needed to come forward." The judge interjects. "So, you're saying Jonathan's deception was your impetus for returning?" Michael's eyes flick to Jonathan. "Yes. His lie complicated mine, destroyed my family's trust, and made Elizabeth believe her husband was gone forever. It was time to set things right." A hush descends. The jury exchanges glances, shock mingled with sympathy. Elizabeth's face is etched with a complex mix of anger and relief. All attention turns to Jonathan. His defense attorney stands, voice shaking slightly. "Your Honor, my client maintains he never intended to harm his wife. Can we examine his mental state at the time? These twins shared a complicated childhood. Perhaps Jonathan believed faking his death would solve his problems." The judge nods and instructs the gallery to allow Jonathan to take the stand next. The courtroom braces as the man who faked his own death rises, his decade of lies poised to face the full force of the law. Chapter 8, Family Secrets Explode. Jonathan Whitaker stands in the witness box, his confident facade cracking under the weight of scrutiny. The judge reminds him of his oath. He clears his throat and begins. I never meant for any of this to happen," he says, voice quivering. He provides a version of events. 5 years prior, he was overwhelmed by debts, ill-advised business ventures, and a collapsing marriage. He saw his brother Michael's disappearance as a blueprint. If Michael could vanish, perhaps he too could escape. So Jonathan meticulously planned, forging documents, purchasing untraceable materials, and creating a false narrative of his own demise. Elizabeth's attorney presses him on the extent of his planning. Jonathan's gaze shifts to his wife, regret flashes in his eyes. "I thought if I died, my insurance policies would pay off my debts, Elizabeth would collect the settlement, and our daughter would have a future." A collective gasp echoes in the courtroom. The jury sits in stunned silence. He describes hiring 2 men to stage the accident, drivers who stopped on that rainy mountain road, creating skid marks and tampering with his car's brake lines. He hid nearby in a rented cabin until news of his death circulated. "I watched the funeral online," he admits, voice hoarse. "I wept with everyone, even though it was all lies." He ends by saying he returned home, confident no one would recognize him, He believed the world had accepted his death. Michael's attorney seizes the moment to question Jonathan about their childhood. Under pressure, Jonathan reluctantly admits to resentment. Michael excelled academically, while Jonathan struggled with anger and impulsiveness. He confesses to blaming Michael for leaving, for making him feel inferior. When I found out Michael was alive, I realized how much I hated him, for making me believe I could do the same. I saw my chance to outdo him. Elizabeth's attorney stands, seeking clarification. So your actions were motivated by jealousy as much as desperation? Jonathan nods, shoulders sagging. Yes. Families in the gallery shift uncomfortably as Jonathan reveals more. Their father, a decorated war veteran, had favored Michael, celebrating his successes. Jonathan felt invisible, unworthy of love. That emotional void drove him to the brink. As he speaks, the siblings' fractured history unfolds like a tabloid exposé: childhood abuse, parental neglect, and a relentless need for approval. The jury scribbles notes furiously, red pens racing across pads. Each revelation drives the wedge deeper between the brothers and exposes wounds that possibly fueled this elaborate deception. The judge calls for a brief recess, allowing everyone to process the explosive testimony. Reporters huddle outside, cell phones capturing the courthouse steps. Neighborhood whispers intensify, social media posts ignite with speculation. Elizabeth stands outside, leaning against a pillar, eyes closed. The teeth of betrayal dig deep, but she steels herself, knowing the truth, painful as it is the only path to justice. Chapter 9, Emotional Confrontations. The courtroom reconvenes, and the atmosphere crackles with tension. Elizabeth's attorney requests a moment for his client to speak directly to Jonathan. The judge grants permission, cautioning them to maintain civility. Elizabeth rises, her wedding band absent, and faces Jonathan. Her voice trembles but grows steadier with each word. You told me you loved me, you shared our dreams, and you held our daughter. Yet all along, every promise was a lie. You died 5 years ago for me. I built a life around that lie, only to learn you faked your death to solve your own problems. Her eyes brim with tears as she continues, recounting the nights she spent sobbing alone, nights she believed herself a widow. How could you? How could you let me believe you were gone forever? Jonathan lowers his head. No words come. The jury watches in hushed stillness. He finally whispers, I was selfish. I thought I was saving you from my failures. I never wanted you to suffer, but I see now I caused more pain than I could have ever faced without faking my death. Michael stands and steps toward his brother. His voice, rigid with emotion, cuts across the silent courtroom. I gave you a blueprint, Jonathan. I left because I couldn't handle our father's expectations. You saw me escape, but you twisted my choice into something far darker. I didn't sign up for this. He turns to Elizabeth. I'm sorry. For everything. I watched you mourn, too. I never meant for her to hurt. Their shared grief hangs in the air like a storm cloud. Elizabeth, tears streaming, directs her gaze at Michael. You disappeared. You never called, never wrote. We all thought you were gone. You left us to fill the hole in our hearts with hope and then kept hiding. Michael bows his head, shame flooding his face. The judge intervenes, reminding them to stick to facts rather than emotional tirades. The attorneys reassert control, questioning Jonathan about his daughter and his plans to make amends. Jonathan stands and addresses the court. My daughter deserves a father who is present and honest. I will face the consequences of my actions, whatever they may be. But I am here now, and I will not disappear again. Elizabeth sits, composed but weary, as Jonathan returns to the stand. The jury notes her resilience, her courage in confronting the man she once loved. The defense attorney invokes mental health assessments, pleading for leniency, arguing that Jonathan's actions stemmed from severe depression and a sense of worthlessness. Elizabeth's attorney counters that deception cannot be excused, that the trauma inflicted on his family demands accountability. The judge calls a brief recess, and the jury leaves for deliberation on the authenticity of the footage and the implications on the divorce settlement. Outside the courtroom, whispers and camera shutters echo as spectators discuss the extraordinary turn of events, a divorce hearing transformed into a family drama rivaling any daytime talk show. Chapter 10, Unraveling the Twins' Motive. When the courtroom reconvenes, a forensic psychologist, Dr. Evelyn Carter, takes the stand at the request of the defense. She outlines her assessment of Jonathan and Michael's mental states during the period leading up to their respective disappearances. Dr. Carter describes a history of familial trauma, a father prone to rage after returning from service, a mother emotionally distant, and relentless comparisons that left both brothers feeling inadequate. She testifies that Jonathan exhibited symptoms of clinical depression, compounded by financial stress and feelings of betrayal after Michael vanished without warning. She also details Michael's psychological profile, an introverted individual who struggled with social anxiety, compounded by unresolved grief after losing a childhood friend. According to Dr. Carter, Michael's decision to vanish was an act of self-preservation. The psychologist acknowledges Michael's regret but emphasizes that his concealment of his identity prolonged family anguish. The spotlight shifts to the jury, who scribble notes, tracking every nuance. Elizabeth's attorney seizes on these findings to argue that Jonathan's deception stemmed from untreated mental illness and that his actions, while misguided, did not equate to malicious intent. He asks Dr. Carter whether Jonathan was aware of the consequences his fake death would have on his family. Dr. Carter replies that while his depression may have clouded his judgment, Jonathan was fully cognizant of the ripple effects. He believed the ends justified the means. Michael's attorney follows, questioning the reliability of Dr. Carter's assessments given the brothers' intentionally obscured histories. Dr. Carter concedes that incomplete information limits any diagnosis, but she stands firm that childhood trauma played a decisive role. The jury now faces the complexity of determining how much weight to give mental health considerations versus the harm inflicted. Jonathan's defense attorney argues for a reduced alimony and asset division, citing his mental fragility. Elizabeth's counsel insists that she is entitled to a full share of marital assets, including the life insurance payout Jonathan's insurance company is now disputing. The judge listens carefully, reminding the jury that their role is to advise on the validity of mental health claims, while he retains the final authority on property division and support. In private conversations outside the courtroom, jurors debate vigorously. Some sympathize with Jonathan's depression, others focus on the deceit and hardship he imposed on his family. The tension between empathy and justice permeates the courthouse corridors. Elizabeth observes from afar, her emotions a whirlwind, relief that the truth is out, anger at Jonathan's selfishness, and uncertainty about her own future. The presence of Michael in the gallery underscores a fractured family attempting to heal. As proceedings stretch into the late afternoon, the jury prepares to deliver its findings on the psychological evidence, setting the stage for the final chapters of this extraordinary saga. Chapter 11, Legal Ramifications and Public Outcry. News crews have begun to camp outside the courthouse, their satellite trucks vying for prime position to capture the first glimpses of Jonathan, Michael, and Elizabeth as they arrive. The local newspaper publishes a front-page article headlined, "Man Who Faked Death Faces Judge, Twin Brother Appears Alive." Social media buzzes with theories, pundits offering armchair analyses of the brothers' motives and mental states. The community, once tight-knit and supportive, now fractures under the weight of betrayal and scandal. Inside the courtroom, the jury returns after hours of deliberation on the mental health evidence. The foreperson stands. We find that Jonathan Whittaker's depression significantly impaired his judgment at the time of his fake death, but we do not believe it absolves him of responsibility for the emotional and financial suffering inflicted upon his family. The judge nods, taking note of the jury's recommendation. He turns to Jonathan's attorney to consider any additional testimonies or motions before issuing final rulings on spousal support, asset division, and potential criminal charges. Elizabeth's attorney presents a motion to seize Jonathan's remaining assets, including any residual insurance payouts. The defense counters, pointing to Jonathan's limited resources and the necessity of some support for his rehabilitation. After tense negotiations, the judge rules that Elizabeth is entitled to 2/3 of their joint assets and full coverage of legal fees. The judge then addresses the possibility of criminal charges for fraud and obstruction of justice. The district attorney, having reviewed the evidence, announces that federal authorities will investigate possible mail and wire fraud related to Jonathan's forged documents and staged accident. Jonathan may face prison time if indicted. Outside, the community reacts with shock and anger. Local businesses that once endorsed Jonathan's bakery withdraw support, and former friends express betrayal on social media. Elizabeth's daughter, Samantha, grapples with bullying at school. Peers call her the girl whose dad is a liar. Counselors step in to support her, and Elizabeth vows to rebuild her life, focusing on her daughter's well-being rather than the embers of a shattered marriage. Meanwhile, Michael volunteers to cooperate with federal investigators regarding any knowledge of Jonathan's accomplices. He also seeks legal counsel to address potential charges for abandoning his family under false pretense. Observers note the irony: the brother who wanted to vanish now faces public scrutiny for re-emerging. Local clergy and counselors emphasize the need for mental health awareness, turning the sensational story into a rallying cry for compassion and prevention. Chapter 12, Final Verdict and Fallout. Weeks pass as federal investigations unfold behind closed doors. In a subsequent hearing, a pretrial agreement is reached. Jonathan pleads guilty to fraud and obstruction of justice. The plea deal spares him lengthy prison time in exchange for community service, therapy toward mental health recovery, and reimbursement of all financial losses inflicted on Elizabeth and their daughter. The courtroom is filled once more as the judge pronounces the sentence. 2 years of supervised probation, mandatory mental health counseling, and restitution payments. Elizabeth exhales deeply, recognizing that some closure has been achieved, but the scars remain. Michael's legal situation unfolds in parallel. He is granted immunity for providing crucial evidence against Jonathan but is required to attend family therapy sessions and contribute to reparations for emotional damages caused by his disappearance. The judge acknowledges his cooperation and orders a joint counseling plan for the entire Whitaker family, hoping to mend relationships fractured by years of lies. Outside the courthouse, members of the community gather to witness the aftermath. Elizabeth emerges first, composed, her gaze fixed forward. Samantha, now 15, stands beside her mother, shoulders squared. Michael stands just behind, solemn-faced. Jonathan appears last, shackled in cuffs, walking with a stooped posture that contrasts sharply with his once confident stance. Cameras flash. Elizabeth delivers a brief statement to reporters. "I hope that by sharing our story, others will find strength to face their own truths. I forgive, but I will never forget." Jonathan declines to comment, his eyes cast downward. The Whitaker home, once a mansion of secrets, is sold to pay restitution. Elizabeth and Samantha move into a modest apartment, starting anew. Salad days of the bakery, once Jonathan's dream, are replaced by Elizabeth working part-time at a local cafe while attending night classes to finish her degree in social work. She channels her experience into advocacy, volunteering at support groups for families affected by fraud and mental illness. Michael takes up residence in a small rental near Elizabeth's new home, participating in therapy sessions. He spends weekends volunteering at a local shelter, seeking redemption through service. The brothers' relationship remains strained, occasional phone calls are laced with awkward silences. Elizabeth, however, forges a tentative friendship with Michael, acknowledging that while his actions hurt her, his return also shed light on deeper truths that demanded accountability. Chapter 13, Epilogue, Aftermath and New Beginnings. 1 year later, the courthouse looms in the distance like a reminder of events that altered lives irrevocably. In a quiet ceremony inside a local community center, Elizabeth launches Whitaker Hope Foundation, an organization dedicated to supporting families affected by fraud, abandonment, and mental health crises. At the podium, she recalls her journey, the shock of discovery, the courtroom battles, and the wrenching confrontations. She thanks supporters and announces partnerships with mental health professionals, legal aid services, and educational nonprofits. Samantha, now a high school senior, stands beside her mother, reading a poem she wrote about truth and resilience, drawing tearful applause from the audience. Michael assists in organizing the event, distributing pamphlets on mental health resources. He approaches Elizabeth afterward. "Thank you for giving me a chance to make amends," he says quietly. She nods, offering a tentative smile. "We're not family anymore, but we're connected forever. I appreciate your effort." He shakes her hand, the weight of unspoken regrets lingering between them. Jonathan, now living in a halfway house under probation supervision, works part-time in a bakery workshop teaching adaptive cooking classes for individuals with disabilities. His therapist describes his progress as steady but slow. In a private letter to the court, he writes, "I've spent too long running from my problems. Now, I face them one day at a time. I hope that someday, Elizabeth and Samantha can find peace without me." The community has shifted too. Neighbors once wary now nod politely as Elizabeth passes by with Samantha, who has blossomed into a confident young woman pursuing a scholarship in psychology. Local news outlets spotlight the Foundation's efforts, reporting reduced incidents of family abandonment and increased awareness of mental health in the county. The courthouse itself sees fewer sensational cases. This story remains etched in collective memory as a cautionary tale of deception, loss, and the intricate bonds of family. On a cool autumn morning, Elizabeth and Michael walk through a local park, discussing Foundation plans. Leaves rustle under their feet as they share a moment of quiet understanding. Neither mentions Jonathan, but both acknowledge that truth, painful as it can be, is the foundation upon which healing begins. Samantha jogs ahead, headphones in place, music pulsing as she listens to a podcast about forgiveness. In the distance, the courthouse steeple glints in the sun, a distant reminder that from its benches and gavels emerged a story of betrayal that ultimately led to reconciliation and hope.